Today I'm going to try to draw this castle in Tallinn, Estonia, and if you're wondering, this is the same castle that I mentioned in yesterday's video. And as opposed to yesterday, today I'm really not too concerned with proportion. I know I came across as pretty obsessed with it yesterday, but for whatever reason, it's not exactly a priority for this castle. As you can see, I'm starting with these windows, and I do so before thinking about the rest of the scene. The even less experienced artist in me would love to draw the shape of the castle straight away, especially the top part with the crenellations, which, if you already knew that word, I applaud you. I had to look it up. But if you're like me and you didn't, crenellations are those alternating gaps you often see at the top of castles. But anyway, because I'm interested in the entire scene, I don't want to risk leaving insufficient room for any of the things you're seeing on the left. Of course, there are other ways of going about this, but I was more prepared to jump right into the windows and this central feature in general, even if it meant tweaking some of the proportions along the way, just to ensure that everything fit into the frame. If you've been paying attention, you might think this is at odds with another approach I often use and talk about, specifically when drawing towers, and you'd be correct. With towers, I like to start at the top and work my way down, but that's just because, I don't know, I guess I have a thing for towers, and if the rest of the reference suffers, so be it. Here, though, I want to represent this woodland setting and how the castle is kind of growing out of it. I think that adds a lot to the general atmosphere of this reference, so I'll do whatever I can here to maintain that. Also, it seems the window saga continues. I've talked about all sorts of different approaches to drawing windows over the past few days, about being a little bit too in my head about them and how they always end up looking messy. But I'd say that these finally give me a bit of a break. Lucky for me, the design here is simplistic. There aren't a bunch of details or shapes going on, and the frames of the windows are darker than the panes, and that means I can go ahead and literally draw them with the pen, which I know sounds stupid. But if you've been following along, you'll know how easy these are in comparison to some others. So yeah, drawing these was nice and incredibly simple compared to some other recent examples. As I go about this one, I would like you to notice the flow of my drawing and how very little of it ever seems stuck or hesitant. This is something I've spoken about ad nauseum and will continue to for the foreseeable future, as long as it's relevant. But today, I've thankfully kind of surrendered to the drawing. I'm moving around the paper with a little bit more grace than usual, and if I had to diagnose it, I'd say it's probably thanks to all of this texture. Very little here is perfectly straight or smooth. Instead, we have the right side made up of the castle with its rough construction, and on the left we have all this foliage, which of course is anything but perfect. All of this texture leaves me free to interpret quite a bit, just like with the proportions, which I'm pretty unconcerned with, and having only two windows to fit certainly helps with that. All of this texture means that I can relax. It would be physically impossible for me to accurately reproduce everything exactly the way it looks on screen anyway. So instead, I can reference this reference and do what I can to suggest what I'm seeing. Needless to say, I will ideally move closer and closer to an accurate portrayal of my references, even when they are pretty close to impossible to copy. But at this stage, by focusing too intently on the minutia, I run the risk of overwhelming myself and losing my admittedly simplistic interpretation of scenes like these along the way. So to combat this, I'm drawing loosely and confidently wherever I have the opportunity. I think you've probably seen it in my foliage recently, especially in like small groups of flowers or faraway trees. But I'm trying to take a similar tack and apply it to a wider variety of things. To invoke yesterday, once again, there wasn't very much in that drawing that I would have felt comfortable, fluidly drawing. The bicycle probably went in the easiest, but there was still a reasonable amount of thought that went into it. Here, I can feel myself easing up, like relaxing into the drawing. I'm considering the texture of certain areas significantly more than the lines I see in my head. I'm doing what I can to avoid thinking about scenes and objects and light as hard objective lines. And instead, I'm trying to see them as they are, like as shapes, imperfect and precise, like dimensional shapes. And I think that has given me some room to feel freer in my process. This drawing will not be perfect, and I don't mean that in the sense that it won't be like a photocopy. I think that's pretty obvious, but that it won't be what I had in my head, like perfectly matched to what I had in my head. It won't be my own perfect iteration. But having drawn with this, mild indifference, I think I'm slowly getting closer to that ideal. Maybe the most concrete part of this drawing is these crenellations, and I better repeat that word a few more times if I'm ever gonna commit it to memory. But they are far and away the most objective component in this reference, hence my deliberation. Other than these, everything else for the most part can be loosely interpreted, but if these proportions are wildly off, in my opinion, that could ruin the cohesion of the drawing. I want to make sure they're not too tall or too broad, and specifically that their dimensionality is apparent but not glaring. Once again, I talked about this concept yesterday, whereby fixating on drawing something correctly, I can actually overemphasize it, therefore, ironically, drawing it incorrectly. So I wanted to ensure that I didn't do that here with the crenellations, but unfortunately, by thinking about them, I still kind of overdo it. I'm adding in some shading to differentiate the front from the sides, but I spend very little time shading much else in this drawing, which, you guessed it, overemphasizes them. Overall, I'm glad I'm aware of this concept, and especially my predispositions, and hopefully I can get a firmer and firmer grasp on this by using a lighter and lighter touch. One final thing I wanted to mention about something I brought up in kind of a silly way yesterday, and I promise this is the end of all the yesterday talk, is how this channel is not meant to be educational. I think sometimes the way I speak about the process could be misinterpreted as didactic, like I'm trying to teach you something. But if you've been around since the beginning, or gone back and watched all the previous videos, which is precisely what you should do, you'll know, or I hope you'll know, that I'm in no position to teach you how to draw. Sometimes when I take a more sober approach to these voiceovers, especially when I'm not being self-deprecating, I do consider how someone might interpret it, and I really hope they don't think I'm trying to guide them or that I really even know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Obviously, the learning part is in the title of every video, but I'm sure even that could be misconstrued. I don't say all of this for the person who jumps into a single video and doesn't understand it, but I really say it for you, the person who has seen more than just this video, and more specifically, someone who is also not very good at drawing. I don't want you to be lulled into seeing what I'm doing as the way to do it, but instead, just my experience of learning. It's not even really my way because I don't have the experience to even know what that is yet. In my photography career, I actually have spent a good chunk of time talking about how to do this or that, but that comes from many years of experience. Even still, most of what I talk about in that regard is not objective. I try to make it clear that, this is how I achieved X, Y, and Z. But here, with these drawings, I don't have years of experience from which to pull. Again, I do not know what I'm doing. So I just want to make it crystal clear that this really is for entertainment purposes. If you happen to learn a thing or two about something conceptual or about the production of the series, like the videos themselves, I welcome that. But as for the drawing, I urge you to remember that I'm less than 50 days into it. Maybe there will come a day when I kind of know what I'm doing and can, forward some of my lessons over to you. But even then, they will be highly subjective and personal. I'm not here to teach you how to learn to draw. I just want to show you my experience of doing so for myself. I have a feeling that this is all apparent to the overwhelming majority of viewers, but for the small minority who might be looking a little too deeply into, I don't know, my techniques or whatever, I would refer you to one of thousands of other highly adept alternatives. So while I don't think you should be learning from me necessarily, I really do hope you enjoy watching my process of learning, as well as, and especially, listening to me yap about it. Okay, before we finish this one up, and here's a testament to everything I just said, all of the texture you can see on the bottom left is so far beyond my grasp. I think I ultimately do an okay job at roughly implying what's there, but I'm having a hard time understanding how to delineate between like stone or mulch or rocks on the ground, and it can get pretty frustrating. I don't want to get lost in drawing each and every individual shape, but without that, I'm not sure how to specify one thing versus another. So I'm trying to practice this stuff. I think the castle wall turned out, you know, pretty okay. But when I get to the ground, it all tends to get a little murky. All right, so here's the final drawing, and again, I actually do like this one. I think, like I said, the castle itself, specifically that central feature, ended up working out pretty well. The texture, I think, is implied well enough. I probably could have spent more time on the tree, but I am glad that the hill exists, kind of in the way that it did in the reference. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this one. I think it could have turned out god awful, so I'm glad that it didn't. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're liking this series. I really appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.